Why culture keeps destroying value. And for me, culture, there's three areas. The first is that it's intangible. It's intangible in the sense that you cannot put a number into your business valuation modeling, or you can't put a number into your synergies. So it cannot be tracked like you track other things after close as board members or the executive teams. And if you could imagine that you could track culture the same way as you track all the financial numbers and things were going kind of south, then you could start taking some action. But we don't. And I think that's one of the things that we're missing when it comes to culture. The second thing is strategic focus. When we do look at culture, we seem to look at it at the strategic level, looking at what are the values and behaviors. But also there's the myth that culture takes years to change. And so we're looking at anything we're doing in culture longer term rather than what's actually happening today, immediately in the business. And I think that's one of the other downfalls on culture. Third and the final one, and this to me is the crux of it, is conflict avoidance. This is an area that from the beginning, once you have your due diligence, you start your due diligence and people start working together, you need to identify the things that are working well, the things that are causing you concern, and the things that are frustrating you. And you need to have some mechanism to get these things on the table. If you don't get these things on the table, they will just grow and grow and grow until they become too big, and then you definitely want to avoid them. And it becomes the elephant in the room until it either implodes or explodes. And so this is my personal opinion, that these are the three things that impact the culture and the value, the destroying value. So I'm going to talk to you a bit of the first acquisition I was involved in, and then the merger. So going to the acquisition with Cargill and Cerastar, these are actually two business units within the larger Cargill and Cerastar. These were two starch businesses. Cargill was a small player in the market. It was a commodity bulk, tons of us. Cerastar were number one globally in the markets. They also sold bulk commodities, but they also worked with the customer on what they call customer solutions. So you take an example of a Mars bar, they would work with Mars on the texture and the mouthfeel, the sweetness of the Mars bar. And Cargill bought them. Their strategic motive for buying them was to buy those capabilities. So here's two businesses. They're in the starch area. They have similar processes to make starch. They're competing in the same markets, and they have the same values. So on the surface of it, they've got a lot in common. So moving to the merger, Holcim and Lafarge, the merger of equals, excuse me, and it was called the merger of equals because they were both the same size from an asset footprint globally, revenue, and people. The strategic motive here for the two merging was the two larger shareholders of both organizations wanted to free up cash. And again, these businesses are in the building materials, cement. So they both had several cement businesses and plants around the world. So similar processes again. And the values were the same. The market and Lafarge saw that maybe they were more innovative on the surface, but otherwise they're pretty much the same. So here's one of the traps, what they call the familiarization trap, that boards need to be aware of, as well as leadership teams. Just because things may look similar on the surface, that does not mean things are similar. And I think that's sometimes in acquisitions and mergers, they have this false security that there's a lot similar. So this should be easy. So beware. And the other thing you have to be aware of is these companies today, or say yesterday, were competitors, and tomorrow you have them as colleagues, and they're meant to be buddies and friends. So talking to the culture of the organizations, to give you a bit of a sense of the culture of the organizations. When Cargill was when it was announced to the market that Cargill was going to be buying Cerastar, the customers and suppliers in the market were saying that the bureaucrats and the cowboys were coming together. And actually that turned out to be a very good descriptor of the organizations. Serra was Franco-Italian, very formal, hierarchical, centralized decision-making. Because they were number one in the markets, they were deliberate in their approach in the markets, because whatever they did, a lot of the competitors followed. As you can see here, all men, and it was all men at the level 1 and pretty much at level 2. They actually wore 3-piece suits. Meetings were formal. They had an agenda and minutes. They would have civilized discussion, because often these things had been agreed already and they were just been formalized in the meeting. If you went into Sarah Starr's head office, you saw beautiful artwork and sculptures. They had an executive dining room and they had a dining room for everybody else. The leaders sat on one floor and their teams were on another floor. So that just gives you a high-level summary of the Sarah Starr culture. Cargill, American, as a small and entrepreneurial, they were very opportunistic in the market. They didn't have to care about what others would do and follow them. Informal, it was quick decision-making, decentralized decision-making, smart casual. Meetings were informal. There may or may not be agenda. There definitely was no minutes. And the national sport was to argue and debate. If you go into the Cargill sites, they were functional. They open plans, so the leaders often sat on the desks in the open plan with their teams, and canteen that everybody used at all levels. So that gives you a summary of the Cargill culture. So you can see already coming together, even though they're in the same industry, they produce the same products and they have similar values. There is potential here for some conflict. So moving to Holcim and Lafarge, the clockmakers and the Versailles courtiers. So Holcim is a Swiss company, the land of the clock, land of precision and timing. And that was what you found in Holcim as well. It was very process-driven, very timely, decentralized decision-making. Meetings had an agenda and they had minutes. They had good, robust discussion and debate. Leaders and the teams were on the same floor, even though they were in offices, but they were on the same floor. And the canteen that we had was shared by other companies. That actually wasn't on site. We had to go off site for a canteen. And yeah, so that gives you a summary of the Holcim culture. So moving to Lafarge, the Versailles courtiers. If you asked anyone about Lafarge, they would say they're very French. And you'd ask, what do you mean by very French? And they'd say, they're like the Versailles courtiers. They were formal, they were hierarchical, centralized decision-making. Actually, all decisions had to go through the CEO. The CEO was also what they call the PDG in France, which meant that he was the chairman of the board, as well as CEO. So for the last 8 or 9 years, he'd been reporting to himself, whereas the Holcim CEO reported to board. Meetings did not start on time. They were usually 15 to 20 minutes late. They did have an agenda. They did have meetings, minutes. Because of the decisions were made by the CEO, there was just a lot of discussion. Some decisions could maybe be made in the meeting. When you'd go to their offices, beautiful offices again with beautiful decor, beautiful painting, and sculptures. But leadership sat on one floor and the teams on other floors. They had 3 dining rooms, one for the executives, the top 10, then another one for for the management, and then one for all employees. So that summarizes Lafarge. So again, you get a sense of, even though they both produce cement and they both have similar values, there's quite a few differences. Excuse me. Okay, so lesson 1, the same value is not the same value. And as board members, the question I would ask is, of the due diligence team or the leadership team as you're looking at, mergers and acquisitions, is how are they protecting their values? And the same with us, how are we protecting ours? So how are they monitoring and measuring that value? How do they ensure that people are rewarded for demonstrating and being role models in that value? And how are people being punished if they're not? And so this is key questions to ask. And if you look at those 4 organizations, one thing they all had in common and said that they were all strong in was safety first. But when you look at it from Cargill and Cerestar going to the acquisition, and you look deeper, some of the information you can get through due diligence, other you had to get after close. But what you noticed was different was Cargill had a lot more minor incidences and disciplinary issues than Cerestar. But when you looked at more serious accidents or incidences, Cerestar had more. And then when it came to fatalities, Cerestar had more. So what is clear here and what you need to do is, if this value is really important, you need to be all the time measuring it and ensuring that people are following it. So in Cargill, if you went from one building to another in a plant environment, and you're going to another office building, you're not even going to the plant, and you don't have your hard hat on, then you will get a warning. Then you get a second warning, and then you'll finally get a written warning if you continue doing it. So it's very embedded in everything Cargill did, safety. And that was my observation when I looked at Cerestar and when I moved to Wholesome, that this is a very strong protected value in Cargill. So be aware that the same value is not the same value, and drill down to find out more. Lesson 2, rule or guideline. And this will depend on the industries. So some industries, they will have more rules and regulations than others. But on top of that, then you have national culture. And in the case of Wholesome and Lafarge, I use the analogy here of a zebra crossing to try and describe the difference between the 2 organizations. So if you've ever been to Zurich or in Switzerland and you're crossing the road, it's zebra crossing, you will see the cars will stop immediately. They'll screech to a halt to make sure that they do not go over the line as you stand there waiting to cross. Whereas if you go to Paris and you can be there with a young child, you could be there for a while, cars still zooming by, and finally someone decides to stop to let you cross the road. Wholesome, being Swiss, the land of the clocks, and that is very much more conservative culture, country-wise, and rule orientated. Whereas France, as we know, the land of culture and freedom of speech, etc., is very much more a guideline culture. And so when you put the country culture on top of the organization culture, it gives you another complexity. And what does that do when you start putting 2 companies together? Well, when you put 2 companies together and you start mixing people across, or even if you don't mix them across, but they're kind of side by side. So if in Wholesome, someone broke a rule, there would be a consequence. But if it happened in a department that was been run by someone that had been in Lafarge, they may or may not have any consequences. And so what that does is that starts causing confusion and resentment, like, oh, hold on, how come that person was disciplined and that person isn't for doing the same thing? So you need to be clear very early on what's a rule and a guideline. And the rules, there shouldn't be lots of rules, but they should be clear to everybody, black and white, like the zebra. And to give an example, going back to Cargill, and we were putting together 2 trading businesses, and we updated the trading policy that everybody had to come to the education sessions to sign, that they had attended, and they agreed with the new trading policy. One of the lines of the rules within that trading policy was not to breach trading limits. Well, a couple of weeks later, we had a trader break a trading limit, but he made lots of money. So the manager is coming to me and the president of the division to say, hey, they've made lots of money. We're still getting used to the policy. We have exceptions before. He's young. Let's keep him. Let's not fire him. And this is where the board has a role in So we said to the manager, okay, so we let this guy off. So what do we do with the next one? So they breach it, but maybe not make as much money. Should we fire them or not? Or what happens to the person that breaches it and loses money? Is that one that's clear cut? We let them go, but the others we allowed to stay. And we said we can't do that. We have to make it very clear. You breach it, you're fired. So it was a tough decision, but we did it. But with the 2 years I was still within the business, we had no one else breach it because it was very clear. You breach it, even if you make money, you will leave the organization. So you need to make clear early on what are the rules and what are the guidelines and what are the consequences if they're not conformed to. So moving on to lesson 3, the power and weakness of meetings. This is the incubation center for conflict or conflict avoidance. Meetings can tell you an awful lot about an organization. Do the meetings start on time? Do they finish on time? Do they have an agenda? Do they keep to the agenda? The minutes, when they go through the minutes, are the actions from the previous meeting taken place and completed? If not, is there any consequence to that? Are the decisions made in the room or outside of the room? Is the leader the one that's talking the most and everyone is quiet, or is it vice versa? What coalitions are going on? Or other power dynamics? Are people coming in and out of the room? Are people on their phone? Meetings can tell you an awful lot. So giving an example with going back to Wholesome and Lafarge. So Wholesome, as you know, is timely. Lafarge were coming into meetings late. So there you are, you're already having the first thing that is going to cause conflict. Because also for Wholesome, this is a sign of respect being on time. So Wholesome is coming in late, Lafarge is coming in late for the meeting. They've already started. They may have to go and repeat themselves on things that they've already discussed because of the person coming into the room. Also because Lafarge can't make decisions, it's just discuss. So very few decisions are being made in the meeting. And then they're passed over, or they're to the next meeting that when they're going to meet. And over time, what's happening, that some decisions will be made in the meeting, but a lot are piling up. And finally, they're becoming urgent. And they need to be made now, because these are big decisions. These are to do with strategy, structure, people. And so what happens, the CEO is making them on his own, or a couple of people are making them, but not all the relevant people that should have been involved in it are involved. And so therefore, they're upset or annoyed, or even trust starts to become an issue. And so if you could see that's happening there, and that is also happening in other parts of the organization too, because it cascades down and across the organization, this is starting to potentially cause chaos and the things that devalue an acquisition or a merger, and becomes the big cultural clashes. So as board members, you should be making clear, and encouraging the integration teams in that they lay down ground rules and how they're going to operate. And what are they going to do if people don't conform to them? What consequences are there? I mean, a simple thing, that actually a similar situation happened in Cargill in other business units that actually ended up in a chaotic situation like I described, and they put a new business unit leader in. One of the first things he did was, he didn't turn up for the meeting in time, the door was locked and it didn't open it. And even if his dayline meetings, that people were late for the first part, they didn't get in for the rest of the day. So that quickly changed, as well as he had fewer decisions items on the agenda so that they could make decisions and move on. And within a quick amount of time, he turned that business around. I mean, there's other things too, but even these simple things help to transform and change the business. So lesson 4, this to me is a myth. The myth is that culture takes years to change. Yes, it can, but culture is changing immediately when the two organizations are coming together. And the simple things of, like I was just saying, having meetings and that, and who is going to conform and change and who is not. And then again, it depends. If it's an acquisition, you can finally say, well, we bought you, so we're going to do it this way. In a merger, when you're meant to be both equal, then that's where the power struggle is. But things are changing immediately from day one, and other things may take years. So go back to the Cargill Sarastar, they actually set up a new offices which I would agree is a great idea to do. But it still had its teething problems and challenges. But we could see culture changing from day one there. But there were signs, particularly in Spain and Italy, that nothing had changed. And it became an issue about 2 years later when we realized that projects were being delayed, some other measurements weren't being met, engagement scores were going down. And when we researched, we realized nothing had changed locally because it was still all Cerestar people. The general manager still ran it as, centralized decision making. They had to be involved in everything. So they were slowing things down. So once we realized that, and there was a few other things that they were still doing that were the old Cerestar way, we brought some people from Cargill in to help change the culture quickly. So moving to lesson 5, unwritten rules. The adage of what gets measured gets done. And usually when people are looking at culture and you also have consultants in, you're looking at kind of the artifacts and you're looking at the values of the organization and the behaviors, but the day-to-day things is what you need to get to. And I find that the best way, I haven't found any survey that can get to this. I find focus groups and one-to-one interviews. And the questions you want to ask is, what do leaders focus on? What do leaders ignore? What would leaders be annoyed if it happened? What would they be happy with? What would you never get away with? Or what would some people get away with? What decisions can you make? What decision can't you make? And describe a typical meeting. That will get to the unwritten rules. And then you can decide, okay, which of those unwritten rules do we need to change and which are okay to continue? If you go back to lesson 2 and the rules and guidelines and the trading example, so imagine a new guy is starting, a woman starting on a trading desk, and he's asking his colleagues, okay, so tell me how things really work around here. If we allowed that guy to stay after breaching the trading limit, the unwritten rule would have been, don't break the trading limits unless you're going to make money. But if you lose money, you're going to be fired. So here as board members, again, I would ask people to ask the due diligence team and them to find out and ask what are the unwritten rules so that they can be unearth it and then decide which ones need to be changed. Finally, lesson 6, this sounds obvious, practice what you preach and think about the signals that you're sending both internally and externally. Going back to the Holcim Lafarge merger, because of the sensitivity of this, and it's a merger, the CEO and the integration team said that to ensure objectivity in the selection process for the level 1 and level 2 of the organization, that they would use a global headhunter who also did leadership assessments to help them ensure they had an objective process. So they had the assessments, and one of the headhunters from the organization would sit in the interviews along with a Holcim and Lafarge person. And on Christmas Eve, so they really timed it nicely, when they announced the new executive team for Lafarge Holcim, immediately both organizations saw 2 people there that no way should have been there. But they were there because of their loyalty to the potential CEO. And immediately, what's the signal that's sending in the organization? You're looking at that and you're saying, okay, so really, we're not going to put the right people in the job. We're going to put people that are buddies or are loyal to whoever has that job. So that already sends a signal in the organization of cynicism, and a lot of people saying, right, I'm starting to look. And that was one thing that for Holcim and Lafarge, they hemorrhaged high potential, high performing people leaving the organization. And quite a few of these also left with a package. And another thing, staying with Lafarge Holcim being the Versailles courtiers, they were going on an investor roadshow with Holcim to the States to sell the new organization. And one of the selling points was going to be reducing costs significantly with the synergies from the 2 organizations. Lafarge hired a private plane to fly them from Europe to the States, excuse me, and also to take them around to the 10 cities. Holcim went on the normal commercial flights. This incensed particularly the Holcim shareholders, but it was one of the last nails in the coffin for the CEO of Lafarge, who was going to be the CEO of the new merged organization. This, along with his way of overriding decisions and things, because he always was able to do it, where the new executives from Holcim would not tolerate it. He did not become the CEO of the new organization. And that is only the beginning of the saga with the Lafarge-Holcim merger. So that's lesson 6.